One year I had Albertina Walker, the Queen of Gospel, from the Caravans.
She's celebrated birthdays with the same joy she's sung about for decades. But this year, at 85, Shirley Caesar finally did something she's never done before.
I am celebrating it next Friday, but I celebrate from October 1st.
She told the truth she'd kept buried behind the music, the sermons, and the standing ovations. For years, we've watched her dominate the stage with a voice like thunder and velvet, and a spirit that could lift an entire congregation to its feet. Grammys lined her shelves, crowds filled her pews, and yet, behind the pulpit and the applause, there was a story nobody really knew. What was the gospel queen hiding all these years? Why did she stay silent about her private battles, her quiet griefs, and the enormous weight she carried? And more importantly, what did she finally admit that has everyone seeing her in a whole new light? Stay with us, because once you hear what Shirley Caesar finally revealed, you'll never think of her the same way again. Chapter 1. Humble Beginnings in Durham.
She's a legend in gospel music, and now she has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Before she was the First Lady of Gospel, before the awards and the headlines, Shirley Caesar was just a barefoot girl running through the dusty streets of Durham, North Carolina, a place where poverty and faith were stitched into every corner of her life. Born on October 13, 1938, the 10th of 13 children, Shirley's arrival into the world wasn't met with much fanfare. The family's home was small and drafty, its creaking floorboards echoing both gospel hymns and the occasional rumble of an empty stomach.
Got in trouble as a child here, just acting up, as children will do.
Her father, James Caesar, worked long hours as a tobacco laborer by day and preached wherever the Spirit led him on Sundays. Her mother, Shirley Caesar, carried the weight of feeding and clothing the children, her hands raw from scrubbing floors for other people while still finding the strength to sing softly as she worked. But Shirley's story turned heartbreaking early. At just 7 years old, she lost her father. One morning, he was simply gone, leaving Hallie to raise 13 children alone. As Shirley would later say, "We didn't have much, but we had Jesus, and somehow that was enough."
There's absolutely nothing that's too hard for you in the name of Jesus.
It was her mother who encouraged the children to pour their pain into their voices, to let the music heal what the world kept breaking. At just 8 years old, Shirley stood up in church one Sunday and sang her first solo. And from that moment, everything changed. Her voice was more than just strong. It was startling, a sound that carried grief, hope, and something else entirely, purpose. By 12 years old, she had already recorded her first song as Baby Shirley Caesar, becoming a professional before most kids her age even dared to dream.
Because I was not one of those that was likely to succeed. And God turned that thing around.
Those early years weren't easy. Some nights there wasn't enough food, some winters there was no heat. But the more the world tried to push her down, the louder she sang. Music wasn't just her escape, it was her prayer, the best way she knew how to let out the pain. As she once put it, "I didn't choose gospel music chose me."
That powerful name of Jesus, there's healing in that name, there's salvation and deliverance.
Chapter 2. The Caravans and Finding Her Voice. By the time she was 18 years old, Shirley Caesar had already become a local legend. Her voice, raw, emotional, and undeniably powerful, was echoing through churches across North Carolina. But she didn't just sing. Even then, she ministered through her music, reaching people's hearts in ways that words alone never could. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next.
I think that there's a lot of things that make Shirley Caesar very special. Someone who can combine a great voice and a wonderful gift of music.
That year, she received the call that would change everything. An invitation to join the Caravans, one of the most respected gospel groups in America at the time. Led by the incomparable Albertina Walker and James Cleveland, the Caravans weren't just a singing group, they were a spiritual powerhouse. Their harmonies could light up a church like a revival tent, and their testimonies could move even the hardest hearts. For Shirley, it was an opportunity beyond her boldest prayers, but it was also a daunting challenge. "I had to earn my place," she later admitted. At first, she was just the little girl with the big voice. But it didn't take long for her to stand out. With songs like Sweeping Through the City and I'm Not Tired Yet, she brought something different.
For years, it was those songs that really kept me alive.
A voice that was at once thunder and velvet, fire and faith. The Caravans toured relentlessly, crisscrossing the country on creaky buses, singing in packed churches, and sleeping wherever they could. There were late nights, early mornings, and very little rest. Sometimes there wasn't even enough money to eat properly, but Shirley soaked it all in. She watched Albertina Walker command a stage with grace and authority.
And she would always push us. And this is why, and I give God glory.
She learned from James Cleveland how to pour your soul into every lyric, and she developed her own style, not just singing, but testifying. One pastor who heard her sing during this time reportedly said, "It was like the Spirit took over her vocal cords. You couldn't teach that kind of power." He was right. You couldn't. Behind the scenes, life wasn't glamorous. She still sent money home to help her mother and siblings, but every time she sang, she felt closer to her purpose. Those years with the Caravans were more than a chapter in her career. They were her proving ground.
We worked feverishly to bring it into fruition.
Chapter 3. Stepping Out Alone. By 1966, Shirley Caesar was outrightly the shining star of the Caravans. Audiences waited for her solos. Promoters put her name at the top of programs. She could have stayed in that comfort forever, traveling with legends, singing to packed churches, and basking in the safety of a beloved group. But deep down, Shirley felt a stirring, something sacred, something urgent, and it wasn't ambition, it was obedience.
Gospel music. There's no music like gospel music, number one, because it speaks of Him.
God was calling me to stand on my own, she later said, and I had to listen. So, at just 28 years old, Shirley shocked the gospel world by walking away. Leaving the Caravans, the most iconic group in gospel at the time, felt almost rebellious, especially for a young woman in a male-dominated industry.
And saw an old ragged car coming. Yeah, she did.
Why risk it? People asked. Why leave a good thing? The truth was, she couldn't ignore the voice inside her any longer. But stepping out alone wasn't glamorous. There was no record label waiting with a contract. No guarantee that the audiences who loved her with the Caravans would follow her as a solo act.
The purpose of my ministry is outreach, to give back.
In fact, many in the gospel community doubted she could survive without the group's name behind her. Her first solo album, My Testimony, wasn't just a title, it was a declaration. Every track was sung with raw emotional fire, telling her story, losing her father, enduring poverty, finding faith, and carrying a calling that sometimes felt too heavy. Some nights, the rooms were small, the checks were even smaller, but Shirley didn't care. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing faithfulness.
I learned so much. More than what I was doing. I learned so much more, and I was able to vote.
Radio hosts who once dismissed her began playing her records. Pastors who doubted her began inviting her back. Churchgoers leaned in as she sang, and many wept moved by the sincerity in her voice.
I honor the Lord for this wonderful privilege. He held back rain and has given us a beautiful day. Isn't this wonderful?
She summed it up simply in one interview. "I don't need a spotlight. I just need a microphone and the truth." Her solo journey wasn't easy, but step by step, song by song, Shirley Caesar began to carve out her own path, and with it, a new standard for what gospel music could be. Chapter 4: Breaking Barriers. As Shirley Caesar's solo career gained momentum, something extraordinary began to happen. Her voice started reaching far beyond the church walls.
You've got to suck it in, suck it up, and tell yourself, I'm going to come out of this.
Not because she chased the mainstream, but because her gift was simply too powerful to be contained. One of her early supporters, the legendary Mahalia Jackson, reportedly called her a fire you couldn't put out. And that fire soon burned its way into places gospel music rarely dared to go. It started with her performances, thunderous, heartfelt, and unforgettable. Every note she sang felt like a prayer, and a revolution rolled into one. But as her reputation grew, so did the invitations, and not just from churches. Hollywood started calling. In the decades that followed, Shirley collaborated with icons outside the traditional gospel world.
My name would be enshrined in a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
One of her most celebrated moments came in the late 1990s, when she sang with Whitney Houston on "He's All Over Me" for the soundtrack of The Preacher's Wife. That song, and her unforgettable cameo in the film, introduced Shirley to millions who had never stepped foot in a church. But that was just the beginning. She appeared in films like Why Do Fools Fall in Love and The Fighting Temptations, sharing scenes with stars like Beyoncé and Cuba Gooding Jr. She even appeared in popular television series such as The Parkers and The Good News.
Shirley, we are looking to make our choir a little larger. So you think you can just let it out for me?
Insider sources from gospel circles reportedly expressed surprise, even skepticism, at her willingness to step into Hollywood. Some questioned whether she was compromising her message, but Shirley never flinched.
If you take away the women, we have nothing left. And if God can trust a woman to carry his living word.
"I wasn't trying to fit in," she said at the time. "I was trying to reach out." She brought gospel music into spaces it had never been before. Award shows, radio charts, soundtracks, and she did it without watering down her faith. Each appearance was another quiet rebellion against the idea that gospel was just church music. And with every new stage she stepped onto, Shirley Caesar proved something her critics allegedly didn't want to admit. You don't need to compromise your soul to broaden your reach. She wasn't chasing stardom. She was expanding her ministry, one unexpected audience at a time. Chapter 5: First Lady of Gospel.
The Christian jumped up and ran next door.
By the time Shirley Caesar was well into her 40s, the gospel world bestowed on her a title she neither sought nor expected, but fully earned: the First Lady of Gospel. It wasn't just about her voice, even though that remained unmatched.
Ladies and gentlemen, one more time for the reigning queen, Pastor Shirley Caesar!
It wasn't just about her awards, even though by then she had already won multiple Grammys, Doves, and Stellar Awards.
14 Stellar Awards and so many others, along with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
And it wasn't just about her record sales, even though she was filling pews and moving records at a pace few could keep up with. It was about how she carried herself. On stage, she was fire and grace, stomping, shouting, crying, and testifying as if every lyric were a lifeline. She didn't chase headlines, she didn't post cryptic messages or feed gossip columns. Instead, she leaned harder into her faith. Shirley Caesar may have been the First Lady of Gospel to everyone else, but to herself, she was simply a woman walking, praying, and learning to lay her burdens down in her own time.
Hit the broad scope of it because We have country gospel, and I love that.
For Shirley Caesar, gospel was never just music. To her, it was a ministry. And ministry, she believed, wasn't just what you said from a pulpit. It was what you did when nobody was watching. Even as her albums sold and her fame grew, Shirley kept her feet firmly planted in service to others. From the beginning of her career, she understood that people needed more than songs. They needed help, hope, and sometimes just someone to see them. That conviction led her to establish the Shirley Caesar Outreach Ministries, a program dedicated to feeding, clothing, and uplifting those in need, from the homeless to struggling families and elderly shut-ins.
Going to full-time ministry with my singing and, of course, my preaching ministry. It wasn't easy.
But she didn't just write checks and pose for photos. Shirley was known to show up in person, handing out meals, praying with strangers, and comforting the hurting. One woman who attended one of her outreach events recalled, "She held my hand, looked me in the eyes, and prayed like I was the only person there." You don't forget that. Her church became more than a place of worship. It became a refuge, a sanctuary not just for praise, but for survival. And in true Shirley Caesar fashion, she found innovative ways to sustain her ministry.
To kind of officially do some of the things that she really was passionate about here in her hometown.
She opened a storefront, using its profits to fund her outreach, ensuring the programs wouldn't rely solely on donations. That storefront has helped keep families fed and children clothed, proving that her compassion wasn't a seasonal project, but a lifelong commitment. She also spoke boldly about issues others tiptoed around: poverty, racial injustice, and the responsibility of faith communities to act when others wouldn't. For Shirley, the spotlight was never the point. "Ministry is what you do when the cameras are gone," she once said. And her legacy of service, much like her music, continues to echo long after the song ends.
I just believe that my love for the Lord all of these years has kept me and helped me to stay young.
If gospel music has a godmother, it's Shirley Caesar. Over the decades, she's moved from center stage to something just as impactful, standing just behind it, holding the door open for the next generation. For Shirley, mentorship wasn't an obligation, it was a calling. She believed that talent without humility was a house built on sand, impressive at first glance, but destined to collapse without the right foundation.
He will take care of you.
Many of today's gospel stars, including Yolanda Adams, Tasha Cobbs, and Leandria Johnson, have all spoken publicly about the role Shirley played in their lives. "She didn't just tell me how to be great," Tasha Cobbs said in an interview. "She told me how to stay grounded. That's even more important." Shirley reportedly made a habit of calling young artists unexpectedly, sometimes leaving voicemails full of encouragement, other times showing up unannounced at their performances to cheer them on from the audience. Her mentorship wasn't loud or performative. She didn't parade it around for the cameras or use it to keep herself relevant.
There is no one like Shirley Caesar. Okay. She is amazing.
She simply lived it. Even backstage at awards shows, she would pull nervous young singers aside to pray with them. And while she always adapted to the changing industry, from vinyl to streaming, from pulpits to social media, she never stopped warning newcomers about the dangers of chasing fame without faith. And in an industry often plagued by egos and envy, Shirley Caesar remained a rare kind of leader, one who lifted others as she rose. For decades, fans, peers, and critics alike wondered, what was Shirley Caesar really carrying? She had lived her life with grace and poise, her eyes bright, her voice unwavering. But sometimes, in interviews, during quiet pauses on stage, there was a look in her eyes that seemed to hint at something unspoken. Now, at 85, she's finally ready to say it out loud. In a recent conversation, she admitted what many have long suspected. that behind the accolades, the ministry, and the music,
Gifts and callings are without repentance. However, I feel that my singing is a part of my ministry.
she had been silently breaking under the weight of it all. "I stayed quiet because I thought my pain had a purpose," she said. "I thought if I kept it to myself, maybe it would make me stronger." What the world didn't see were the nights she wanted to quit, the mornings when she questioned why God had chosen her, the betrayals she endured in silence, the exhaustion she swallowed whole, and the loneliness that came from being placed on a pedestal she never asked for.
That the Lord has blessed us and given us another chance at life.
Insider sources say she often confided in a few close friends that the constant pressure to be perfect, to never make a mistake, to smile even when she was breaking, was sometimes harder than the touring itself. But now, she says, she understands. Pain can be holy, but it's not meant to be hidden forever. Her confession isn't a scandal. It's a liberation.
Most memorable, as far as my singing career is concerned, that's my most.
For herself and for anyone else who has ever felt crushed by the weight of other people's expectations. When Shirley Caesar finally let the world in, we didn't lose our gospel queen. We simply saw the woman she's been all along. And she's even more inspiring than the myth. Off stage, she was equally inspiring, poised, grounded, and deeply committed to her faith and her calling. And she didn't stop there.
Don't throw in the towel. Listen, if you throw it back, heaven said, I'm going to throw it back at you.
Even at the peak of her fame, Shirley decided to go back to school, proving that her hunger for growth didn't end with music. After initially leaving her studies to pursue gospel full-time, she returned to Shaw University and graduated with honors, earning a bachelor's degree in business administration in 1984. Not only that, she went on to study at Duke University's Divinity School and received several honorary doctorates, underscoring her intellectual and spiritual depth. Her education, she said, wasn't just for herself. It was to equip her to serve others better. And serve she did. Her songs during this era became living sermons. No Charge, Jesus, I Love Calling Your Name, and especially Hold My Mule, which didn't just top gospel charts, but became cultural touchstones.
I can tell you that in spite of everything, he still lives.
One insider reportedly remarked that you could feel Shirley's presence even before she opened her mouth. A quiet authority, a spiritual certainty that filled the room. By now, she wasn't just a singer, she was a standard. Her accolades, which would eventually include 11 Grammys, 15 Dove Awards, and 14 Stellar Awards, along with induction into both the Gospel Music Hall of Fame and the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame, were just the outward acknowledgement of what fans already knew.
At the Grammys, and I look at the Stellar Awards and all of those things, and shows a nobody like me, I'm grateful.
Shirley Caesar wasn't just a gospel artist. She was gospel. Chapter 6. Love and Loss. For decades, Shirley Caesar poured all of herself into her music and ministry. But in 1983, she finally found someone who could match her fire, not just on stage, but in life. That year, she married Bishop Harold Ivory Williams, the leader of Mount Calvary Holy Church of America.
But I'm not. I'm married to the most wonderful man in the world, Bishop Harold Ivory Williams.
To onlookers, it seemed like a perfect union. And according to those close to her, it was even more powerful behind closed doors. "We weren't just married," Shirley said in an interview years later. "We were joined in mission." Over 2 decades later, it still feels like the first time for her. Their bond was built not on celebrity or spotlight, but on shared faith and a deep spiritual connection. Together, they became a ministry power couple. She preached through song, and he preached from the pulpit.
God respects 3 things: principle, his anointing, and position.
At church services, outreach events, and even in quiet moments at home, their devotion to each other was undeniable. For Shirley, it was the first time she didn't have to carry everything alone. They traveled the world together, growing their church and expanding their outreach. But behind the joyful photos and public appearances, they were, by all accounts, simply two servants of God who supported each other's dreams and shared each other's burdens.
How long have you been married?
I've been married now 26 years, and I would marry the same man all over again.
Then, in 2014, tragedy struck. After more than 30 years together, Bishop Williams passed away. The loss was immense for a woman who had already endured so much: the death of her father, the weight of public expectations, the grueling demands of her career. This was different.
My legacy to be, and she pleased the Lord. That's my prayer.
I lost my soulmate, she admitted softly during a rare interview, but I didn't lose my purpose. Even in her grief, she stood firm. With tears in her eyes, she kept singing, kept preaching, kept showing up, honoring her late husband not just with words but with action. For Shirley Caesar, love had been a sanctuary. Losing it could have broken her, but instead, she turned her pain into yet another testimony, showing the world that faith doesn't erase heartbreak, but it does make healing possible. Chapter 7. The Woman Behind the Legend. To the world, Shirley Caesar seemed unshakable, a powerhouse who stood tall through every storm, her voice never faltering. But behind the sequins and the sermons, she carried battles nobody saw. As the face of gospel, she was expected to always be perfect, always faithful, always strong, but she was human.
Some mixed emotions I had. Singing is what I love to do. I'm a pastor.
People see the stage, she once said quietly. They don't see the weight I carry when I step off it. Insider sources close to her ministry revealed that more than once, Shirley broke down backstage, tears flowing in green rooms after nights when her heart felt heavier than her voice could bear. She never fully shook the pain of losing her father so young, and decades later, losing her husband reopened wounds she thought had long healed. On top of that, she faced a quieter kind of ache, one she almost never spoke about publicly: her childless marriage.
Did you ever have any children? And I didn't.
No, that's the only thing I kind of missed out on.
Though she and Bishop Williams poured themselves into their church and congregation, Shirley allegedly admitted to feeling a deep loneliness at times. "I have spiritual children all over the world," she once said. But yes, sometimes the house gets very quiet.
God just began to do great and mighty things for me. I never expected it.
Shirley's life was also peppered with other private struggles: illnesses in the family, friendships that faded under the strain of her calling, and the creeping loneliness that fame often brings. Even as her career soared, younger artists emerged, social media changed the game, and she sometimes felt forgotten, a relic in a world that now favored fast fame over faithful service. And yet, through it all, she never lost her dignity.
I'm grateful to the Lord now because I believe that we're nearing the time of the coming of the Lord. I believe it.